The member for Memramcook Chantermara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm rising today to speak on motion 4, and I don't even know where to start. I've heard some pretty ridiculous things today so far, but first I want to thank the member from Caracat for bringing this motion forward. Access to reproductive health care and reproductive justice is something that is lacking in this province. However, what this also comes down to is that this regulation that we are debating, that has been amended out of the motion, but anyway, Schedule 2A1 of Regulation 8420 of the Medical Services Payment Act was brought in to prevent people, and specifically prevent women, though women are not the only people who need access to surgical abortions, but to prevent them, to restrict access to abortions. And it specifically restricts it outside of hospital settings. And the only reason for this is to discriminate and to restrict access. This regulation, that's why it was brought in, to restrict access. And so there's no reason to keep it unless this government wants to insist on maintaining that position of restricting access to this necessary medical procedure. I want to also thank all of the people who have tirelessly worked to advocate for reproductive justice and reproductive health care in New Brunswick, including Reproductive Justice New Brunswick. But there have been many people for decades and decades who have fought to make sure that it was even legal for people to access surgical abortions. And while there have been steps in the right direction that have taken decades and decades, we still aren't there yet. Because here we are, and we still have this unnecessary regulation. And it was mentioned more than once, I heard it at least once today, that this is about safety. And there are stronger words that I might use, but that's nonsense. People receive health care in community health settings, in clinics, in doctors' offices, all the time. And often people, when it comes to surgical abortions, they might actually experience better care in that type of setting where they're able to get good care. And if people care about money, which I think this government does, it might cost less. But at this point, they're not even paying for it at all when it comes to that. And it's also been said that this is a private business and we're not going to support private businesses. I'm sorry, but doctors, a lot of them work fee for service. How is this different from any other clinic in this province? So, another thing. As we're talking about this, I'd also like to make the point that we must stop talking about what we would do and stop saying, I wouldn't want to have to make that difficult choice and things like that, because you know what? That is shaming language. It is a difficult choice for some people. It is not a difficult choice for other people. And either way, we shouldn't be shaming people for making that choice and accessing that type of health care. And I've heard this government today firing shots across at the official opposition, and you know what? Up until fairly recently, the official opposition party wasn't on board. But you know what? They're on the right side of history now, and this government needs to decide to choose to be on the right side of history. And it was about 6 years ago that this was debated in this House. And it's very clear from the debates, if anyone were to look at Hansard, where certain members of the government stand. And I could read out a bunch of pro-life quotes, but what I want to point out is that at that time, the now Premier said that he was thankful that he was never asked as a cabinet minister or a member of caucus for consensus on this issue. But it looks like that's what's going to be happening today, that there will be a whipped vote on this topic. So I guess the Premier is capable of changing his mind on some things, and I would encourage the Premier and the other members of government to consider that the reason that this law exists is just to discriminate against a group of people who want to access this medical procedure, and that this is not about it being a private business. That is absolutely ridiculous. There's medical care that's provided all over the place, and that is an anti-choice tactic that is being used by diverting away from the fact that this violates human rights and it violates the Canada Health Act by saying that this is about business. It's about rights. Why, especially during a pandemic, but really at any point, when we are talking about making sure that people can access health care, when we're talking about challenges in our hospitals and them being overwhelmed, why would we want to be sending more people to hospitals to access care that they could access in a community health care setting in our medical systems? Why would we not be allowing medical procedures that don't have to take place in a hospital to why wouldn't we be allowing them to take place in our community? It doesn't add up, Mr. Speaker, except for this government to be saying we are going to continue to maintain this discriminatory policy that the government, with the stroke of a pen, could change. There has been a lot of discussion, and rightfully so, about how the closure of Clinic 554 will impact other community members who were not trying to access necessarily surgical abortion, but were trying to access other healthcare services as well. And this motion does mention Clinic 554. This issue does come back to Clinic 554 because Clinic 554 is the one place that, and previously the Morgentaler Clinic, they tried to survive without getting paid for all of the services that they were providing, but it's very difficult to do. But there are other services that are very important at that clinic. Patients with HIV and hepatitis C, and especially we've been talking about the 2S LGBTQ+ community. There's cervical cancer screenings, mental health needs that have been met, IUD insertion and removal, treatment of survivors of sexual assault, pre- and postnatal care for people without family doctors. There's a lot of other services that were provided there, and some still are being provided. But the decision that unfortunately successive governments have decided to maintain has meant that the clinic, Morgentaler Clinic, and then the Clinic 554 have struggled to make sure that they can pay the bills. The only reason that you could say this is kind of a private clinic that's any different from any other medical clinic in this province is because some patients are forced to pay out of pocket for medical treatment, and that is unacceptable in Canada. That is unacceptable for people to have to pay for their health care. And sending this to the RHAs doesn't really make sense to me for them to examine for following the Canada Health Act. It would make more sense, because we know we're not. The Minister of Health at the federal level has said we're not. We know that we're not. And even if we were following it, I still wouldn't think that we should maintain this discriminatory policy and regulation. But the RHAs did weigh in on this topic, and a motion by John McGarry, the board chair of Horizon, said that they will advocate to the government of New Brunswick for payment to physicians to provide abortion services in a quality and safe environment outside of hospitals. So we know that Horizon supports changing this. We already know that. They said it was like at least a year ago, over a year ago. So here we are. We already know that the RHAs would like the government to change this regulation. We know that it's being framed as, oh, well, these private businesses. No, it's medical clinics that have fee-for-service models. That happens everywhere. So that's, you know, not a good argument. And then there's an argument about access. The thing is, there are real barriers to accessing medical care when you have to travel, and there are certain limitations that are put on people, especially when they're trying to access surgical abortion. Their safety may be at risk. There's anonymity, there's transportation issues, there may be childcare because many people who access surgical abortion already have children. The cost, there's a lot of different barriers. And having, it's 3 hospitals in 2 cities at opposite ends of the province. These are not the most accessible locations for a lot of people who live in this province. And I know that having the option for medical abortion, that's a positive thing. However, 49 days, there are many people who are not aware that they are pregnant and have not made a choice around that by 49 days. And so that is simply not an option for a lot of people. And so here we are, and it is absolutely necessary that this government change this, and yet I stand here knowing how I think things are going to play out in the next little while. And I think a lot of people are frustrated and fearful because they have been fighting for so long, and yet their rights are being disrespected, and people who are not in their shoes are making decisions for them about health care. And again, people are being asked to pay out of pocket, and it's not just women, but it is a lot of women who are being asked to pay out of pocket and not be able to access the health care they need. And we live in Canada, and yet people are unable to access free health care. I don't know what else to say, honestly, because I don't know if any minds will be changed, but I guess I want to let everyone who's listening know that I will keep fighting to change this. And I know that this isn't the only thing that needs to change in our healthcare system or in terms of reproductive justice, but it absolutely does need to change. It is not just about Clinic 554. It is about making sure that there is better access around the province. And I urge everyone to really consider, and maybe even government to consider if they will whip the vote, since in the past they've spoken about not whipping the vote on this topic, but urge everyone to consider, do we want to maintain discriminatory policies in New Brunswick that harm New Brunswickers? And I would urge you to say, no, we don't, and to vote accordingly on this motion. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.